Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of our series of podcasts entitled Being Your Best Self. I'd like to start by introducing my co-presenter, Ian Stockbridge. Ian is an accredited counsellor with the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists and founder of Hope Therapy and Counselling Services. Ian, a warm welcome to you. I'm so glad you could join me today.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Wendy for many, many years now. She's a hugely experienced CBT psychotherapist who's been involved in working with mental health and well-being for well over 30 years. So an absolute pleasure to be here with Wendy today.
Thank you, Ian, and an absolute pleasure to be with you today. I hope the listeners really enjoy this podcast. It's our first podcast and it's about mindfulness. So these series of podcasts will look at the areas of mental health and well-being from a variety of different perspectives. Today, we will be looking at the subject of mindfulness, what mindfulness is, how we can all be more mindful, and how it can be supportive of mental health and well-being. So, Ian, you are a very experienced mindfulness teacher as well as a counsellor. So could you start, please, by explaining what mindfulness is?
Yeah, of course, Wendy. Thank you. So there's a huge amount of confusion about what mindfulness is and what it is not. But in essence, mindfulness is just about cultivating a mindset where we deliberately pay attention to something in the present moment without getting triggered into making lots of judgments about it, simply seeing it in this moment as it actually is.
And that's really helpful. And thank you, Ian, for that explanation. And how can you say it's helpful to people?
Well, the brain is an incredible thing, but it can also get really confused. It can learn to respond in ways that can sometimes be incredibly useful, but sometimes in ways that are incredibly unhelpful as well. So lots of people will have heard of the fight or flight response, sometimes called an acute stress response, which is an example of this idea. We experience situations where our brains interpret something as a threat, and we start to respond in all sorts of different ways. Our heart rate can start to beat more quickly, adrenaline starts to pump through the body, blood pressure starts to raise. We can experience what for many people can just be a really, really uncomfortable stress response. So the mind and the body are working together to prepare us to either run away from a perceived threat or to stop and fight it. And that was fine back in the days when the sorts of threats that we faced were the wild animals that were roaming across the lands. From an evolutionary biology perspective, we needed to be able to react really quickly and really without consciously thinking too much about it. Our survival depended on that. The problem is that we don't live in those times anymore, and most of the threats that we face are things that type of response is really unhelpful and really unnecessary. That fight or flight reaction can respond for many people in exactly the same way, whether we're facing that wild animal or someone simply cut us up at the roundabout, or maybe they've said something a little bit challenging to us. Things where we really don't need or want to get in a fight over the situation or to run away from it. We don't want our bodies and our minds to prepare us to do either. So mindfulness can be really helpful with things like that. It's just a way of paying attention to our environments, both our internal environments, so noticing when that stress response is starting to kick in, but also our external environment as well. So noticing the things that can be triggering for us, and to notice those things as early as we possibly can. But not just noticing, it's about cultivating a particular type of noticing, or a particular type of awareness where we focus on the here and now, how things actually are, rather than getting caught up with catastrophizing about something, remembering it's not actually a wild animal. So helping us not to start thinking the worst about a situation, or at least to help us to notice when we do start doing that. And it just helps us to take a more considered response to situations that we find ourselves in, rather than that adrenaline fueled reactive way that people can respond when they feel under attack.
Okay. So as a counsellor, what types of people will come to you where mindfulness may be helpful, Ian?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And mindfulness is a practice, the idea of being present rather than ruminating about the past or catastrophizing about the future, can be helpful with so many different types of clients, whether you're working with self-esteem or anger management, whether you're working with anxiety or mood disorders. Mindfulness training can really easily and really successfully be incorporated into client work.
Okay, that's a really good explanation, Ian. Thanks very much for that. And how would people go about learning mindfulness if they were interested?
Well, that really depends on the individual client, or the individual person, and what they're looking for support with and how they prefer to be supported. So just as every person or every client is unique, so can the way in which we teach or train mindfulness. We can make it as bespoke as the needs of the individual person. So organizations like Hope and others regularly work with clients on a one-to-one basis, where mindfulness practice will form a part of the work that we do, and that may be about supporting self-awareness, so helping people to better understand the patterns of the mind and how they respond in certain situations, helping people not to ruminate quite so much, or being aware of it when they are starting to do it, but also helping people to be aware when they're starting to catastrophize about things as well. But mindfulness can also be done in group settings. So, for example, organizations like Hope, we run weekly mindfulness groups where people can simply drop in if they wish, and that's for complete beginners through to more experienced people. It's just a very informal drop-in group that people come along to. Or we offer much more structured mindfulness groups as well. So we offer what's called an MBCT group, which is a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy group, which incorporates elements of mindfulness into elements of cognitive therapy. A really well-established program. It's delivered both in the NHS and by private organisations like Hope and others. And some really interesting and compelling research coming out of places like Oxford University and Bangor University, showing just how helpful those types of programs can be. But I think it's also worth remembering that mindfulness isn't just for those that have some sort of mental health issue. Mindfulness is for absolutely anyone. We can all take steps to just live our lives a little bit more mindfully. And when people start talking about practicing mindfulness, when they're just setting out, they often talk about things like just recognizing a slowing down of those those habitual patterns, those automatic patterns in reactions of the body and the mind, being able to respond more effectively to complex situations because they're just more present and they're just more focused on the situation, seeing situations more clearly because again they're focused on the situation as it actually is, rather than that exaggerated adrenaline fueled version of the situation. People talk about increases in creativity or achieving a better sense of balance and resiliency at work and also at home as well.
Thank you, Ian. That's a really good explanation. And I'm really interested, can you tell me a little bit more about how you can use mindfulness at home and at work?
Yeah, so many people say that if they're more in control of their stress levels, they can be more focused in a work environment. So lots of people also say that if they're more present, they can be more productive and they can be more creative rather than in that constant state of worry and agitation that people often find themselves in. And there are lots and lots of really progressive companies that are embracing mindfulness training and mindfulness practices in the workplace. It's really widely publicized that organizations like Google, for example, have embraced mindfulness in the workplace. Organizations like General Mills, who are the people behind Old El Paso and Haagen-Dazs ice cream, have delivered mindfulness programs. But huge organizations like Intel and Goldman Sachs have all been involved in delivering mindfulness into the workplace just because of a recognition that it can help them in so many different ways. So mindfulness in the workplace isn't just a thing of the future, it's absolutely a thing of the now as well.
It's really interesting. Thank you so much for that, Ian. And I think sometimes mindfulness has a bit of an image problem. We have an image of us sitting cross-legged in the lotus position. I mean, is that really what mindfulness is about, or is it a bit more than that?
And I hear that all the time. And so mindfulness really isn't about that. People may choose to do a formal meditation practice where they may choose to sit and meditate, but they definitely don't have to do that in the lotus position, in that cross-legged position. But mindfulness is also very much about the informal ways that we can be mindful. So lots of people, especially when they're just starting out, just when they're beginning to get interested in mindfulness, they don't want to, or they just haven't got the time or the inclination to sit and meditate for ages. So often it's more about looking at ways that people can simply live their lives in a more mindful way. So that might be mindfully taking a walk, or mindfully eating a meal, or mindfully having a cup of coffee.
Okay.
People often report a completely different experience when eating mindfully, for example. When we're eating, often people's attention can be on things that have happened throughout the day, or worries that they have of things that might or might not happen. And they completely miss the experience of eating the meal itself. They miss the taste, the color, the smell, the textures, the things that can stop something simply being fuel for the body and turn it into being an experience. Mindfulness can also be really helpful in just helping us to notice that beauty that's going on around us all of the time, things that we simply don't notice, the beauty of a sunset, the air on a face, the sound of the bird singing, things that cost absolutely nothing other than a moment to stop and notice.
Yeah, and that's a really good explanation of how we can use mindfulness in our everyday life. And I'm just having pictures of sunsets and birds singing now as you're speaking. So it's wonderful how much you can just create that. That's fantastic. Really good explanation, Ian. Thank you for that. So if somebody wanted to start practicing mindfulness, tell us how they go about it, Ian.
Great question. And there really are so many different ways there. And there isn't a right or wrong way. As I say, we and other people run groups that people with absolutely no experience can simply come along and drop into. Just dip in and out as they wish. No commitment at all. And then we also run more formal programs. And I mentioned the MBCT program earlier. We have loads of mindfulness resources on the website that people might choose to take a look at. But people can also just do these things at home as well, just opening the door and just really focusing on the moment. What does the sun feel like on our face? What about the wind against the skin? What do we hear? Maybe the birds singing, maybe it's people talking or car going past. The trick is just to notice it, just to stop and to notice. And as best we can, not getting caught up in thinking about it or analyzing it, just simply being with it and present with it. And when we notice the mind being distracted and going off to other things, as it inevitably will for all of us, just noticing that. And then just bringing the mind back to whatever we're choosing to focus on. And just practicing that a few times every day can really make a huge difference to how mindful we actually live our lives. These things don't have to be complicated.
Thank you, Ian, for that. And it's a really good way just to sort of summarize some of the processes of mindfulness that you've explained to us. And just to reinforce where to get the information from, could you just say us what your website is? Because I think that'd be really useful for people to go to your website and to look at these resources and to help them to start their practice. What is the name of your website again, Ian?
Yeah, so the website is www.hopefulminds.co.uk/mindfulness. We will drop a link for those people that are watching this on YouTube. We'll drop a link into the comments as well. But www.hopefulminds.co.uk/mindfulness.
So, Ian, it's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you regarding mindfulness, and I'm sure people will find it very useful and hopefully encourage people to practice it more and more and to experience the joy and the interest that mindfulness can bring into our lives. So thank you so much, Ian, for being our first guest. And I just hope people find this useful and listen to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.